this screen. Just give me a quick second. Now that should be on.
By the way, Sebastian,
Yes.
I apologize. How do you want to go with the questions that will go during the session? Do you want them at the end, or is it okay for them to raise their hand and go ahead with the question?
We are going to do it the old Vis Moot way. You can raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer the questions. It just says here on my computer, I just need to quickly exit and then re-enter the chat. So I'll be here in a couple of seconds. Just give me a quick second.
Yep, absolutely. Before Sebastian joins, can I ask you guys to turn on your camera if it's possible, please? To make it as interactive as possible. If you have any issues with the camera, that's not an issue. But in case you are able to turn on them, please do so, as it will be more convenient for speakers to interact with people with turned on camera. Thank you.
अरे पापा को थकावट हो गई है। उन्होंने कहा पापा घर पे चले हैं, पापा को सब्जी देते हैं जाकर।
Okay, perfect. Now I can also unmute myself and I'm going to share my display with you guys. Now, let's get this started. All right, again, a very warm welcome to today's lecture. My name is Sebastian Rheinwald. I'm 28 years of age and I am a law student at the University of Mainz. I was a paralegal at Baker McKenzie and I'm planning on going back there as soon as possible. Because I just love the law firm. I really like my boss and I'm really looking forward. So a small shout out to Baker McKenzie, obviously. I'm not being paid for this. And yeah, I've competed in the Vis Moot 2 years ago, the 30th Vis Moot with Yanis Winkler together, who has been coaching the team in Kazakhstan and who's a dear friend of mine. And I can congratulate each and every one of you for applying and being able to compete here, because it is really one of the coolest experience I've ever had. Maybe also a bit of a background, using you won't know this, but I'm actually in Japan because on the side I'm also working for an airline and I'm traveling around, and that was the reason why I went to Kazakhstan and unwillingly ate horse meat. I also got a message from my wife. She said, I knew that you ate some, but you didn't want to admit it. So a bit of a joke there. All right, let's get to it. As I said before, you have the possibility to always raise your hand. If I see it, I'm just going to interrupt and then we can just have a small discussion, because that's what the Vis Moot's about. It's basically having a dialogue with the arbitrators and having a convincing approach to your argument. But more to that later, and I'll welcome you to the Mastering Oral Advocacy in the Willem C. Vis Moot. Now, let's jump right into it. So I'm not going to go into depth concerning how the Vis Moot is built up. I'm sure that in the past lectures, you have heard a lot about it. And after, in my opinion, a bit of the boring written submission phase is done, the most exciting part happens. And that is actually the oral phase. Now, even though I think the written phase is quite boring, the written phase is fundamental for you guys to be well prepared for the online practice rounds. Because at the end of the day, you're basically having a collection of information which you can then always grasp if a question should pop up in either a pre-moot, an online practice round, or in the Vis Moot finales. And I already mentioned now the online practice rounds. Why are online practice rounds so convenient and why they're so good? Well, the first aspect is obviously global reach. You can connect with teams from all over the world. I mean, if you go to Vienna, for instance, you will have up to 400 teams from all over the globe, from common law, from civil law, from different jurisdictions with different approaches and understandings of the law. So it is a fair training for you to actually get to touch with these people. How are they going to present their arguments? Are they a bit more aggressive? Are they a bit more sentimental, a bit more dramatic? Or are they very stone cold like some Germans are, in my opinion? And also the flexibility. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have a couple of months of getting prepared as good as possible for the final rounds, which means at the same time, you have to utilize every single moment you can. And trust me when I say you should, because for instance, in my experience, when we're in the University of Mainz, ever since at the beginning of February up until the actual finals, we were basically doing pleadings every single day. It didn't matter if it was in a law firm, it didn't matter if it was online, it didn't matter if it was a pre-moot. We were pleading every single time, and it was quite interesting. I mean, if we take, for example, last year's Vis Moot problem, where I was arbitrating quite a lot, it was very interesting to see that, for instance, everything easterly from Europe, the German Data Protection Act was quite relevant in their arguments, whereas in Germany, for instance, nobody really mentioned it. And actually grasping to that and this is also a very fundamental understanding when you're also preparing your pleading. When you actually prepare your pleading, I completely understand that it would be great for you to pack in all the information which you've packed in a memorandum. But let's compare it. I mean, you have 36, 37 pages to actually put information into a memo, but you have 14 minutes to bring up your arguments and your submission. And then you want to pack in everything you said in 37 minutes. That's not going to work. I'm going to tell you up front, that is definitely not going to work. So when you prepare your pleading, be mindful as to what kind of arguments which you want to bring. What are your strongest arguments? And bear in mind all the other things you've written in the memo, because they might be asked, they might be questioned, and then you can plead it. But I'll get back to that later. So online practice rounds, I can only really emphasize of doing as many as possible. I know that Yanis has built up an online platform where you can actually plan online practices with different teams all over the globe. And I can only emphasize of maybe also reaching out to Yanis to get to know different kinds of universities and different kinds of mooties to network and get to grips with the different jurisdictions. Now, before I continue, are there any questions already? It can also be a different question concerning the online practice rounds, but are there any questions? All right, good. Then let's continue. Well, now, besides the online pleadings themselves, you have the possibility to go to pre-moots. Now, what are pre-moots? Pre-moots are basically a competition similar to the Vis Moot finales, only in a smaller circle, and obviously they are not the finals in itself. And they are so great and they're so fundamental because of one reason, which I would like to state at the beginning, because the parties are awesome. I don't know how many times I went to the pre-moot parties and I had such a blast, and I can only tell you, if you want to pick your pre-moots, also pick them a bit concerning the parties and listen to the former mooties, what they would actually recommend, because that is quite cool. But otherwise, obviously, pre-moots are there for practice, and they are there to actually test the limitations of your argument and your pleading style. Now, maximizing the pre-moot opportunities. The selection is very important. I'll be very upfront and blunt with this. There are some pre-moots where the level of teams are a bit higher, some which are less higher, and get to grips with what kind of teams might be going to these individual pre-moots and see if the competition is good enough for you, because you want to test the limits of your argument. You want to see where the flaws are, and you want to actually have the flaws and you want to get rid of the flaws. And now engage fully in these pre-moots. It should be like a competition. The Vis Moot is a sport in itself, which means you want to go there and you want to win. Obviously, enjoy yourself where you can. I think that's the most important thing. But when you are sitting there and when you are going to plead, it is you and your co-counsel trying to win this case. So bear in mind that there will come a time where you're going to be exhausted, where you can't hear your pleading anymore, and you're going to be repetitive. But it's all going to be worth it when you're going to be then in Vienna and competing in the general rounds, or like you said, then in the knockout rounds. And trust me, it is also a great feeling to get an individual acknowledgement. Now, the feedback is an issue which I think you should understand, and I'm going to also be there straightforward. Now, obviously, they're going to be people, associates, senior associates, partners, scholars, judges. They're going to be sitting there, and they obviously know that you are going to be the future of law. So they're going to get and tell you that it has been great, it was good, maybe have a tweak there and have a tweak there. They're going to be mainly positive. Listen to your peers. They are going to be the most honest people in your surrounding, and they're going to tell you what you need to do better and what you don't, what went well and what didn't. And that is so fundamentally important because I've seen so many times people going in there with a lot of confidence, which was great, but they never had a true and honest feedback to actually rethink the argument, rethink their structure, rethink the rhetoric. And then I went in there saying, okay, I've been told that it was all great, but why am I scoring not high enough to proceed, to, for example, to the knockout rounds? So do me a favor and listen to your peers. Now, the iteration, as I said, continuously refine your arguments and deliver the pre-moot to your best of your capabilities and dare to try out new things. Now, what I'm doing here basically is I'm just going to outline for you how the structure of the whole oral phase is going to be. And then in the second lesson, I'm going to go more into depth in the pleading itself and how you can convince different arbitrators to convince them of your argument. Now, moving onwards, experimenting with your pleading style. Now, I think that is the most important thing. And I think in general, if you come from a nation, for instance, like let's take United States, I think the most of you have watched Suits and Harvey Specter. And I think you see in what kind of confidence and what kind of rhetoric he uses. That is a brilliant way, for example, how to be a very convincing advocate, but it's not the only way. You have different approaches, you have different methods, but they all come down with the underlying same basis, which I'm going to get to later. But just understand what you're going to do here. You have a 14-minute pleading, which you're going to say once to a person who has probably never heard it before at the beginning and or has heard it a million times before, and you want to convince that person. So you have to craft a compelling story. You have to grasp them in the minute you start with a great intro and have them really listen to every single word. That also means that you have to be clear, you have to be slow, you have to guide them as if they were your grandma walking through the park, and then engage with them in an emotional, intellectual basis. And what I'm saying with that is, for instance, if you go to Vienna or Hong Kong, you have the possibility to see which arbitrators are going to be sitting there. Do a background check. See what kind of awards were they involved. See what kind of scholars they are and what their opinions are. And try and test these personal things to actually grasp their attention. Now, the Socratic method is also a thing which you have to bear in mind. And I think it's a more advanced technique, which when you feel comfortable with your pleading could make the difference between an 82 pleading and a 90 pleading. And that is, you want to also use your pleading to provoke questions which you know you can answer brilliantly. Now, the problem is going to be that there is no clear black and white answer, obviously. But what you can do is when the arbitrators want to ask a question, invite them to ask the questions you want. So your pleading sounds coherent, it sounds approachable, understandable, and simple. And the last point is something which I personally just really don't understand why that happens more often, because when I was a paralegal in Baker McKenzie and they were preparing for a hearing, I always saw them making a certain amount of roadmaps or some visual aids. Now, if you go through the Vis Moot rules, it states that in general, external exhibits are prohibited. But what you can do is you can make a sort of roadmap to show the chronological order of the Vis Moot problem. What you can also do is just have a visual aid to just show where the exact issues are. And if you do that, you have to talk to your opposing counsel, and you have to talk to the arbitrators if that's okay, if you can submit this visual aid. And to be honest, I don't see a reason why, because because the opposing counsel will say, yeah, sure, I don't care, we're just going to stick to our plan. And the arbitrators are going to be thankful, because most of the time they're just going to come in there and have a quick look at the arbitrator's brief. But if they have their visual aid, and then they're going to then talk between each other and think about the points, and they just look at what you have done, and you can make it in a compelling way of also supporting your argument. Well, then I am 100% sure, and it is being done in practice, that your argument, your pleading, and your stance will then be in their minds more than opposing counsel who have just said their pleading for 40 minutes. So just bear that in mind and give it a try. I think it would be very beneficial for the whole pleading and for your scoring, and it will be helpful for those arbitrators who are just a bit lazy. Now, simplifying complex arguments. I mean, I already stated something before, which I think is very helpful also for the written submission, but especially for the oral phase. You're going to come with a problem where there's no clear black and white answer. And you're going to have arbitrators who are going to be working and gathering their billables as they go, but they're very, very enthusiastic for the Vis Moot, and that's why they want to be arbitrators. But what they will do is, during the written phase, probably read your memo once. So write it as simple as you can so they can get it from the get-go. But the same amounts also to your pleading. When you actually display your argument, try and make it as simple and as coherent and as easy to understand as possible. Now, for example, you can use analogies, or you can use, as I stated before, visual representation. But if you go to an online practice round, or if you go to a pre-moot, or if you go to a law firm to a pleading, just see really, or those who are not pleading, just look at the arbitrators and see if they actually really understand the issue or your argument. Because if they don't, then it is your responsibility at the end of the day, and you can get as pissed as you want, but you have to deliver it as simple and as easy as possible, as day and night. And maybe a story from from back in our day. So our professor is Professor Huber, and we had the issue of whether a drone is an aircraft in the sense of the CISG or not. And initially, we had an incredibly dogmatic approach. It was so dogmatic that Professor Huber said, "Yeah, I mean, it's good. I get your point, but go to a advocate and try and explain to him the most complicated dogmatic thing which we constructed." They did not understand it. They did not like it, and it was at the end of the day destroyed by the most simplest thing, which was, well, it looks like an aircraft, it flies like an aircraft, so you might as well consider it as an aircraft. And that won actually the argument. Simplicity prevailed, although maybe we had the right dogmatic answer. So also bear that in mind. And that goes back also to me saying, doing your background checks. I mean, if you have a scholar sitting there like Professor Ingeborg Schwenzer, she is going to love the dogmatic discussions. She won't, I'm also going to give you an advice, and she does not necessarily only like if you just quote her, because she's going to then tear you apart, and she really wants to know why you actually are of her opinion. But if you come with the most simplest argument, I mean, what necessarily do you want to say? I mean, you could say, for instance, yeah, well, the scholars ABC said this, but arbitrators are not necessarily bound to that. I mean, it is persuasive authority. It is a very persuasive authority, but simplicity can be a very strong tool, and I only emphasize it to use it rhetorically and also in the content itself. And going back to visual representation, that will just empower your basis and your argument in itself. Now, let's quickly go into the general rounds first, and let's then go into the knockout rounds. Now, general rounds, Vienna versus Hong Kong. I think it's spicy is the fact that difference between Vienna and Hong Kong because of also the cultural background. Now, in I personally had my best performance in Hong Kong due to the fact that it was because we went to Kuala Lumpur. No, I had my best performance in Kuala Lumpur because it was based on the fact that it was during the end of the oral phase. And at the same time, I am very comfortable and very used to the very adequate interaction with peers in the Asian culture. In Vienna, it is a bit, I would not say a bit more hang loose, but it is a bit more on the same level, and you can be, they tend to invite you to be more colloquial in the sense of not addressing you as Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, but they would invite you also to use their name. Arbitrator sitting in front of you, if you understand that he is very used to of being called Mr. President or Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, and if they're very used to of you sticking very much to the rules and making clear that you understand the rules, that would make go a long way, especially in Hong Kong and especially in the Asian area. Now in Vienna, it is all mixed up. In Vienna, you have a lot of people coming from European and American areas or Canadian areas, and their approach can be a bit more different. So just try in the online practice rounds, get a grasp of how the arbitrators think, how they speak, how they like to be addressed, and also in their feedback and your presentation skills, and write those down and try and figure out, okay, if I'm going to the general round number 2 and I'm going to have, for example, the judge from the Supreme Court of Canada, I definitely know that I'm not going to dare try and speak with her last name, but I'm just going to call her Miss President. However, emphasize those rhetorical skills and the oral advocacy. So that does not necessarily mean that you have to change your pleading style. It's just tweak it just to each and individual arbitrator or tribunal. So just bear that in mind, and also how you want to emphasize your arguments. I mean, for example, case law in common law countries is like fundamental. It is like the bread and butter. Whereas if you go to Germany and you have like you're quoting someone, for example, Mrs. Ingeborg Schwenzer, they'll be very persuaded by that because that is just our bread and butter, for instance. So just bear that in mind. Common law, civil law, which nation and how they want to be talked to, and also how you would like to emphasize your argument. Before I continue, are there any questions? Feel free, interact with me, and you guys will help me to stay up a bit. Yes, Daniel. Using it can be that he can't unmute himself. Just so
yeah. Sebastian, I have the following question. At the end of the day, we know that after the pre-moots, after the qualifier rounds, let's call it before the playoffs, majority of teams, they know about the case, they know the substance, the arbitrators are familiar with it, and like we all pretty know where it's going to, and which there is like one best position for each of the sides, for the claimant and defendant. And in this case, when everybody knows what like the difference in the finals and the semis, what's the most important thing there?
Good question, and thank you for the question. So the most important thing are two aspects, in my opinion. So let's take the example that you are in the more weaker position. I think last year, in some instances, it was pretty fairly leveled out. You could have good arguments on both instances, but obviously there can be situations where respondent is just always going to win this argument, or claimant in that case. What is very important is if you have like a bit of a hopeless position or whatever steep climb, sometimes muddying the water goes a long way. So just the arbitrator is going to come in there and say, oh, okay, I heard this problem like a million times now. And then they're going to sit there and they listen to your argument and like, I'm not sure if I of he made himself after hearing it a million times after 14 minutes, then you have done a brilliant job. Muddying the water in these instances is a brilliant tool, and just make it, I'm sorry, Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, but it's just not that clear as one could perceive, because A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So that is one tool. And the other thing is, especially in the knockout rounds, you know, in the further you advance, the more difficult it is going to then decide. And then the individual performance is going to count. And many times, the teams with the best oral advocate of that round is going to then go through, because that is just going to be the deciding factor. So work on your rhetorics, work on your presentation skill, and work on your confidence. And then maybe you'll be the deciding factor as to if you're going to go through or not. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
No problem. Any other questions there? Yes, Farangis, nice to have you.
Hi. I'm sorry, I was a bit late for your presentation and maybe I missed that part, but one question. Is it okay to use hand gestures while your presentation and also add some emotions?
Very good question. I'll take you back a bit to my year. I think you noticed that I'm a very I'm a very enthusiastic person, I would say. And one of the things which my beloved coach has always told me was try and narrow it down into a certain space. So if you would take your shoulders and go up until your nose and back down, that is like a space where you can freely use your hands. It's not too much, but it's not it's still there. And I always broke free of it. So the thing is, yes, you should use gestures and try and dose it in those situations where you want to make your argument, because the more contrast you create of doing no gestures and some gestures, the more emphasis you add to the argument and to the point you want to make. Adding emotion, I think if you have the opportunity to plead against, for example, the Southern American teams or Spanish or Portuguese teams, you will notice that they are super dramatic. They are so emotionally invested. Oh my God. And I love it. It is a pleading style which I just love hearing, because it just makes it a bit more interesting, especially after a long day. And it is okay to do it as long as it is real and it is your way of pleading. So when you write your pleading in itself, don't make it emotional. Don't use any like vulgar or emotional language, but the way you emphasize, the way you present it, the way you use your gestures, the way you go into depth, and the way you actually interact with the arbitrators, that can be as emotional as you are, if that answers your question. I assume so. Okay, brilliant. Yes, please, Mr. Madira Akhmetov.
Hello, Sebastian. Yeah, I have a question. Maybe not a question, but I'm seeking advice. Maybe you have some tips on how to overcome anxiety and to make your speech more confident.
Very good question. Thank you for the question, first and foremost. Overcoming anxiety and maximizing your performance. So to be honest, I think anxiety is the most normalist thing when it comes to these situations, because it is a big deal. I mean, we're studying we're studying law, which is sometimes so dry. It can be interesting, but it's so dry, and the interaction is to a minimum. And sometimes you're a very lone wolf. And then when you come down to these oral rounds, and you're trying to convince someone who's been practicing law way longer than you have, it can be very intimidating. But embrace it, practice a lot, and just put yourself in a situation as many times as possible, and then you will first be comfortable in pleading. Second, and to be a bit more concrete, and I think maybe you can use this answer a bit more, because my first answer was a bit of a standard answer. But you have to understand one thing when you go into the pleading, guys. If you sit there in front of a partner or senior associate or a judge or in front of Stefan Kröll or whomever, you guys invested 100 times more time into this problem, into the dogmatic, into the case law than they have. You guys, with your opposing counsel, know more about this article, what the scholars have written, what the main opinion is, than anyone else in the room. And with that confidence, you have to sit there and say, Mr. Arbitrator, the matter of the fact is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and that is how it is. And then they will ask, well, do you have any proof, or do you have any case law, or if you have any scholars? And if you bring that down, there's going to be a moment in the pleading where you notice that you have the arbitrators on a hook, or at least one of the arbitrators, or some of the arbitrators. And that is one of the most satisfying situations. And that just goes back to saying that preparation is key. And if you have that preparation, and if you go into that confidence, knowing that I know more than you do concerning this article, it will go a long way. And then the best thing is that you're going to be super confident in Vienna. But thanks for the great question. Very important. Okay, and then Simbad, and then I'll continue, and then we're going to do a question round at the end of the first half. Please, shoot.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I wanted to ask, I have a fear of the questions from the arbitrators and how to deal with this fear. Like, if you don't understand the question correctly, should you ask again? Will it be, I don't know, okay? And how to deal with this fear?
Yeah, so good question. Thank you for that question. Definitely ask to rephrase the question. I understand that. Also a funny story. In our law school, we have a very, very cool professor, and I don't know if maybe my fellow colleagues from the Vis Moot are tuned in here, but I know exactly what I'm talking about. We have a professor. He's walking around with a with a suit and his shirt buttoned until his stomach, walking around with AirPods, and he's brilliant. He's just very, very kind and super. The problem is, if you do your oral exams with him, he will ask a question in a manner he doesn't even understand himself. Ask to rephrase. They are very into their thoughts, and they think they have a very super intelligent question sometimes, and they just present it in a way that nobody, and not even themselves, really understand. So feel free, have the confidence to take a moment and then ask, excuse me, Mr. Arbitrator or Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, could you please rephrase that question? Just be sure not to do it twice, because then it seems like you're stalling. But feel free to do that. And concerning the anxiety, I can just go back to what I said before. And I'm going to go into depth in the second half of this lecture. Just interact with the people. Just go into depth with it. Just try and have a dialogue with the people, because that's going to make the whole presentation more lively and not as a podcast or a monologue. Does that answer your question? I assume so. I just hope I don't misinterpret the silence as he didn't answer my question. Now, moving onwards. Exactly. Now, we're right now in the general rounds, and there's a significant difference between the general rounds and the knockout rounds. And you have to understand that. Or, do you know what? I'm going to do it differently. So we're going to get a bit more livelihood here. What do you think is the most important thing, or what is the goal going out of a general round? Any ideas? And feel free to raise your hand. Okay, no worries. Then I'll just do it. The most important thing in the general rounds is to... No, you know what? Before I continue, I just want to, because I'm going to ask you a couple of questions later on, and I just want to clear the air here. Trust me, in my sphere and in my lecture, there are no stupid questions. Nobody's going to judge anyone, and feel free just to say whatever you think. In the majority of the time, it is going to be a right answer, not necessarily the answer I'm looking for, but there's no right or wrong here, and there are no stupid questions. So please feel free just to raise your hand and just try and interact with me. Yes, but Ira, please. What do you think the most
Yeah.
important thing is for the
Maybe
general round?
maybe to show a certain like that you qualify for a certain standard like of overally good speech, maybe that you
Very
aren't
good.
like someone who came from the streets and you're actually maybe a good for professional society, something like this.
A very interesting answer. I like it. It's edgy. I like it. Interesting that you say that. Yes, I would say yes. Now, if someone, let's take your example with the streets, okay? Let's say somebody says, okay, my God, okay, this guy came in here. I thought, I'm not sure, but then he completely convinced me. What is then the arbitrator going to do? I'm going to give you the answer. He's going to score you high. And that is the main point. That is going to be your main focus. Your focus is not necessarily in the general round. It's going to be, I'm going to win this argument. Your main focus is, I want to score high. Because scoring high will mean that you're going to go through. And to give you an extreme example, imagine you're going to plead against a bad team. And there will be bad teams. If you win the argument, you're not necessarily going to score high. That is the main problem. And then you're going to go out and of the Vis Moot experience, and then you're going to get the results, and then you see, oh my God, in this pleading where I completely destroyed opposing counsel, I only scored 80 or 81 points. How is that possible? Well, that is going to be because you are not focusing on the quality of your pleading, but you are more focused on destroying your opponent. And that is not going to be the key. And that's why I listed these three aspects. One, mutual respect. Very important. You're going in there, you're representing your client's interests, obviously, but you're not here to trash talk opposing counsel. You're not here to trash talk opposing counsel's client. You wanted to make it in the most respectful way as you can. Another short example, I was in Riga in a pre-moot, and I had a situation where we were pleading against a team, and then it came to the rebuttal and rebuttal. I think you're all aware that the standard conduct is that one party begins, the other party then has also 14 minutes, and then the first party would then have 1 minute of rebuttal, and then the other party will also have a minute of rebuttal. Now, in the rebuttal of my opposing counsel, I remember this very clearly. He started his rebuttal by stating, members of the tribunal, I am absolutely baffled about the argument made about opposing counsel. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was boiling. I said, who the hell does he think to say that he's baffled about my argument? Are you taking the piss? And I was just looking at my opposing counsel, and he looked at me. I was about to lose it, but I was not supposed to go completely out of line. I was not supposed to get disrespectful. I was not supposed to do it in a disrespectful way. So what did I do? I just quoted him. I said, members of the tribunal, opposing counsel said he was baffled about my argument. I would be baffled if the CISG would then be delineated by national law. Now, what did I do? I used the rhetoric of saying, guys, he used something disrespectful, and then I emphasized actually in my argument into it. And the arbitrators were very, very happy about it. And at the same time, I showed that opposing counsel was disrespectful, and he was warned not to necessarily do that again. So that is the key point. Mutual respect. But if somebody is going to try and be disrespectful, feel free to try and show that he's not playing necessarily fair, and then just leave the rest to the arbitrators. Constructive engagement. Go into depth. If you're going to be the second party arguing, if you are going to be responding to opposing counsel's argument, use these points to strengthen your own case. And it is okay to also agree with opposing counsel's points. You can say, opposing counsel made the point of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Whilst this is true, in our case, this just builds up a credibility and shows that you are actually you're first listening, you're taking into consideration what opposing counsel is stating, and you're not saying this is all right or wrong, but you think that you have the right solution. So that just builds up your credibility, and obviously make it balanced. You don't want to be a kiss ass, obviously, but at the same time, you do want to make your point. Now, general rounds and knockout rounds. Now let's do a comparison of both. As I already said, plead with the opposing counsel in the general rounds, and make an effortless and smooth pleading. Try and show all your quality, which you build up in the online pleadings, in the pre-moot, in those 2 months where you were really, really going down the pleading and trying to make the best out of it. Concentrate on the standard etiquette, depending if you are pleading with an Asian, a European, an American, an English tribunal, and then get into the flow of full pleadings. Because trust me, when you have 4 pleadings in 4 days in a row, and sometimes in 3 days with 2 pleadings on 1 day, you're going to be tired. You're going to be so tense because you've been working so hard. You've been working like for months on this moment, and you want to maximize it. So try and get into the flow. Try and get comfortable as soon as possible. And then if all works out, you're going to go into the knockout rounds, and then it is going to be a competition. And now you want to destroy opposing counsel. Let loose. Balance your aggression with the respect, obviously, but make clear that opposing counsel's argument is wrong. This is how it should be. Elevate your responsiveness, go into depth and dismantle opposing counsel's arguments, either in the rebuttal or in your pleading yourself. Try and use the question handling. And just a short notice, when you proceed into the next rounds, tribunals tend to modify a bit the pleading. Sometimes they would say, okay, we want you to do one issue, then we do the other issue then later. Sometimes they say we just want to flip it around. Sometimes they might say they want to not have each and everyone 1 rebuttal, but 2 rebuttals, depending on the amount of issues you have. So just be prepared and just try and elevate yourself like this next 5%, because it's all down to 40 minutes plus 1. So make it count each and every time. Now, going into the knockout rounds, winning the case, develop a razor-sharp strategy to convince the arbitrators that your position is the winning one. As I said before, be aggressive. I'm a personal fan of, like one of the students here asked, being emotional. I'm a fan of making it a bit more lively, because if you make it lively and natural, it just makes it more exciting. Because I personally went into the rounds of 8 in Vienna, and we had 4 pleadings in that day. We were all exhausted, and making it more lively and making it more exciting just goes a long way. It just goes such a long way. And just effectively calling out weakness in a very respectful way just shows the flaws, because in some instances, the arbitrators will interrupt you and say, oh, that is a very good point. Opposing counsel, do you have anything to say to that? Don't count on it, but it can happen. And if that happens, you call out a weakness and you provoke the tribunal to actually question opposing counsel for that weakness. Well, then you're making a very strong case for yourself. Now, balancing aggression and respect. Obviously, it's a bit difficult. Trust me, I sometimes struggle in everyday life with that, but it is inherently important to do that in the pleading. Now, assertive language. Use strong, confident phrasing while maintaining a respectful tone. And strong and confident does not mean that you use complicated language. Use simple, clear, short sentences. Make it easy to understand and make it very, very clear. Tactical courtesy. Employ politeness. Try and set yourself on opposing counsel. Show them that, okay, opposing counsel can do whatever they want. I'm on this level. And a professional demeanor. Maintain composure. Do not make an irritated face if you're faced with a complicated situation. Try and just stay calm. Take a pause. Take a drink. Write something down for your opposing counsel to open up and make it as professional as possible, because you are the master of time in this 14 minutes. It's not the tribunal's 14 minutes. These are your 14 minutes. You do not need to rush through, and you do not need to waste your time for any irritation. Now, mastering the tribunal etiquette. I mean, obviously, you're going to get to know the standard phrases as "Thank you, Mr. Presiding Arbitrator," "Members of the tribunal, good afternoon," and yes, Mr. Arbitrator, or going into depth of, you know, some phrases. You're going to get used to that. I'm not going to go into depth with that, and your peers are going to give them to you. Active listening, very important. It is one of the fundamental principles of being responsive to opposing counsel and also being responsive to the tribunal, because it can very well be that, let's say, claimant starts, you're going to be respondent, and then the tribunal asks a question to opposing counsel which fits perfectly into your pleading. So you can say, as Mr. Arbitrator already pointed out, the standard of ABC is ABC. I don't know. And if you do that, you just show that you're actually not only listening, but you're also engaging with all parties which are there. Graceful concessions. I mean, acknowledge valid points. I mean, you're not making yourself weak. You're just setting basically the field clear. You don't want to waste your time in discussing about something which is already lost. But you can say it doesn't matter if they're right, because my point just completely dismantles it. And then also time management, very important, and it's going to be one of the main criteria. I know you are going to be sometimes, or in some occasions, confronted with arbitrators who completely bombard your pleading with questions, and you feel like it's unfair, but you have to deal with it. It is the way it is. And in most times, and I think there's been a strong improvement in that sense. And most times they will know that they've been a bit unfair, and then they will give you extra time just to quickly summarize the other arguments which you wanted to say. Now, navigating challenges. I mean, the most important thing is, as I already said, simplicity. There's Dr. Markus Altenkirch, my boss, gave me one hell of an advice, and that is called KISS. Now, not KISS in the sense you mean, but KISS in the sense of keep it simple. If you want to put a bit more vulgarness, you can put an F in front of the S, but I'm just going to, in the sake of being professional, say KISS here. Now, identify the issue. Quickly assess the nature of the challenge, whether it is a hostile arbitrator or a difficult question. Try and understand what the arbitrator wants to hear from you. Remain composed, remain still, remain calm, remain easy to be engaged with, and address it directly. What you do not want to do is, when an arbitrator asks you a yes and no question, you do not immediately answer with yes or no. You should answer with yes and no. Always. If an arbitrator says, "Are you saying this?" then he says, "Yes, Mr. Arbitrator, I am saying this because." Do not say, "Mr. Arbitrator, it's a bit of a difficult situation because, you know, I had a very long day and people are not really sure about the situation, but I think that this is the more compelling answer." Don't do that. Yes, because. And then redirect if necessary, because there are going to be some issues where, as you already mentioned, you guys, there are going to be some issues where you have a very steep hill to climb. And then sometimes it would be helpful to try and have a short discussion about the issue which you have, but try and allude then the tribunal to another direction or to another perspective, to try and have them more or less just take your stance or to your perspective of this case. Now, learning from past champions. In my year, I am of the opinion I pled and lost against one of the best Vis Moot advocates I saw, and that was Fabian from the University of Vienna from 2022, 23, yeah. And if you just look at him, for example, you will learn just a lot. He's an incredible pleader. He has an incredible rhetoric, and the way he pleads is a bit of unusual to the standard approach because he is quite fast, but the way he talks and the way he presents his arguments is immaculate. And lean onto these people. The same way, if you say you have more of a conservative pleading style and more of a very strong one, then feel free to look at the Indian teams. The Indian teams are eloquent as anyone else, and they have an unbelievable way of presenting their case, and backed with incredible knowledge about the case, it just goes a long way, and you just have the feeling that they cannot be derailed. Get used to quick thinking. You have to be on your feet. 14 minutes. I've gone like this. So you, if you have a question, know the case file, know the case number, know what the main similarities to the case at hand is, and just try and be intellectually agile. And then if you add that with like good rhetorical phrases, it will go a long way. And as I already said, thorough presentation is key. Now, we are actually done with the first part, and we're going to quickly do a 10-minute break, and then we're going to do 40 minutes of the second presentation. Now, just quickly, the key takeaways. Essentially, be aware what you're doing. Are you doing an online practice round? Are you doing pre-moot? Are you in the general rounds, or are you in the knockout rounds? And as I said, anything before Vienna and before Hong Kong is a playground for you to test your pleading style, test the boundaries, and try and find the best pleading you have, also to fight the anxiety and have the essential tools to actually be the best you can be. Now, always continue to improve. If you go out of a pleading and you have the feeling that you didn't learn anything, it was a waste of your time. Always. It is a waste of your time. You want to either identify issues which you need to improve, or you need to identify arguments which opposing counsel has brought up, which can be either problematic or, for the other side, very helpful. And always, always, always in the pleading, and I'm going to go in depth to that in the next presentation, try and make it as lively and as open and as feasible as possible for the arbitrators to spend these 45 minutes with you guys to just have the maximum points. Because if they have a conversation with you and you can think with them, they will appreciate it a lot and score you high. All right. With that being said, I'm opening now the round for a couple of questions concerning the first presentation. Feel free. Yes, Temirlan Abdullin.
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. I wanted to ask about the English. And if you use simple and short English, don't arbiters think that you are not capable of complex English, or your English is not very good? What do you think about that?
Good point, fair point. Let me just ask you back. Why do you want to use complex English? Because you want to convince them that you are well spoken in English? Yes, yeah, please. It's a direct question to you. Feel free.
Yes, it seems like if you use a complex English, it would be more like more convincible to arbitrators, or am I wrong, or am I being wrong?
No, you're not being wrong. I think it is a very understandable opinion which you can have, but trust me, that is just not the case, because after having a discussion with some coaches and also with some lawyers, it is very often that if you tend to use complex, trust me, I had the same thing. I used language which I didn't even know what the word meant, but I just used it. Trust me, they would think, okay, he's just all talk, but there's no background. And maybe you would even provoke them to go into depth that if he starts presenting himself like that, is he really the person he's trying to tell he is? That's the first thing. The second thing is complex language does not emphasize your argument. Complex language will only have the arbitrators listen and try and think more harder, which necessarily is not always the best thing. Just make it as simple as it can be. I mean, you don't. It is sometimes a paradox that sometimes people think that complex language would make it more feasible and more professional, whereas simplicity would just make you think like, yeah, sorry, he's right. It is just simple as that. So I would reckon not to try and lean into tricky and long and difficult words, but just keeping it simple. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. And then I'm going to take, I am very sorry. I see an H and a Y and a P and a C and a Y, and then I'm lost.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. That's because of Zoom. So I have a question about the style of speaking and
Yeah.
how to learn the way to correctly put in the intonation on the right words. Because I noticed how you put the the right emphasizes on the keywords, and it's brilliant. And I
Thank
mean,
you.
like how to make my speech not so monotonic, and
Mhm.
probably you can suggest some tips on it.
Mm. Well, connecting that with the question before, I mean, if you have complex words, it makes it a bit difficult to identify where you want to make your emphasis in the sentence in itself. But what you want to do is when you're writing your memo, always, no, your pleading, always try and ask yourself the question, if you write your pleading, I would recommend you should write it down and try and memorize it. But when you do that, do it in paragraphs which are very feasible for the thought process in itself. Like you have issue A and you have this argument and a backup argument. And then in that issue, highlight those sentences which are inherently important. For example, the first one, the rule and the example with the case, and just mark those. And when you do that, and I'm going to go into depth that later into the presentation, try and slow down your voice, slow down the tone, make it slow, spread the words, use your gestures, and go into depth of the syllables. And if you do that, and then you create pauses, it will go a long way. Then we know what you're trying to say. I know what you're trying to talk about then. So just take those key sentences, focus on them, and then the other ones just try and keep it slow and simple. But I'm going to go into depth then later on. Is that cool? Thanks, Elias. So now Amir Hussein Ranjbari.
Thank you, Sebastian, for your comprehensive lecture. I have a question about, I have two questions. The first one is, what is the relation between being a good researcher and being a good oralist? And the second one is, in the case we encounter two unpredicted situation. For example, if we didn't any research on a specific problem on the case, i.e., we didn't foresee this problem, this issue. So the problem arise in the oral session. What we can do, what can we do, and how can manage this problem, this new problem?
Okay, thanks for the compliment first. The connection to now your first question. I don't necessarily think that is a big correlation between having being a great oralist and a great researcher. Necessarily, it would be great if that is the case, but I'm just going to out myself. I think I've become a better law student after the Vis Moot, because during the Vis Moot I've seen that what the real standard of being a great researcher is. And my best friend Paul, he's an incredible person, and he's incredibly intelligent, and the way he researches it and his stuff is immaculate. And if he says he can't find it, then he really can't find it. And I did not go into depth the same way he did, but what we were well aware was I'm capable of pleading and selling the story. And that comes back to the fact that you have to understand that this competition, even though there are going to be two people in one pleading sitting there, is a team effort. So you guys supporting each other, you guys helping and doing the research, also checking the cases which opposing counsel has mentioned, goes a long way. And you sit down and you have a discussion about it and try and figure out, does it really fit? if it does, what can we take out and what can we not take out? So not to answer your question, not necessarily is there a correlation. There should be, because it would make life a lot easier. But I think I'm the perfect example that if you're an average researcher, you can still be a good advocate. If I just may position myself there. Now, your second question, when you have unforeseeable situations and problems, goes back to the point I made with quick thinking. There will come times, especially at the beginning, where people quote cases and quote situations which you could not foresee. But it just goes back to the fact that when you have your thought process, and that goes to my friend Duncan, who is also a brilliant person and is also one of my great friends, he tends to just simplify everything in a way that is so simple that you understand it. And then if you get that, and if you keep that in the back of your head, any case where a judge or a tribunal made a decision might edge on into a problem in that simple thought process. And those simple thought processes are going to be seen also in the literature which the scholars write. So even if you have never heard that problem, even if you have never foreseen that this arbitrator will ask this question, take a moment, take a breather, and just figure out, okay, what is exactly the issue here? What did this case decide on? And what negative effect could it have? And where did I read it, or where did I see it? And that goes back of having a comprehensive research or having great teamwork where someone saw something and just mentioned it in the group. Did I answer your question? Again, silence. I assume that it was answered. Alina Abdullaeva, feel free.
Yes, Sebastian, thank you very much for this very useful presentation. I just wanted to ask your personal opinion on preparing the speech, whether it's better to write the speech from the very first word you are going to say to the very last word and memorize it, or it's better to just prepare a roadmap of the things that like you are going to say and then just adjust it when needed. So what's your opinion on that?
My opinion is we used to work on memorizing the pleading by heart, and sometimes we had a more longer pleading that which we were actually going to say, just so that when we figure out if it's going to be a very vocal tribunal or not, that we can just, you know, go to plan B or plan C. And I just always felt very comfortable knowing that I had something to say and I can just pray it down in a manner of just keeping my capacity to the questions itself. I personally think it was a great approach. But you don't have to do it. I know enough people who have done more than brilliantly in their pleadings, and they just had a roadmap and they just freestyled through. Although I do have to say, my coaches always said to me that I never really stick to the pleading itself, and I was just adding on different things, which was always quite funny afterwards. But yeah, that would be my answer. I would just memorize it by heart, but you don't have to. Trust me, you don't. Does that answer your question?
She says yes in the chat.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah, we still have a chat. I don't have that open. Okay, that doesn't matter. Okay, then next one, Balnua.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask about the arbitrators because I had experience in regional moot competition, and I faced an unpleasant situation when the judge treated our team like disdainfully, and it was noticeable by his tone and aggressive questions. Can you share your experience if you face such? Like, what would you do in such a situation? How to remain calm and not to start treat the arbitrator aggressively? It's the question.
Well, first and foremost, I'm sorry that you had to face that. It's that is very unpleasant. Although, before I answer your question, Uzen, I have a question for you. Was I unpleasant in your pleading? Because I was arbitrator.
I mean, you asked a lot of questions, but it was quite interesting. But I had very unpleasant arbitrator during our pre-moot in Abu Dhabi, and I remember him, and it was quite difficult round. But other than that, most of the arbitrators were quite nice with us with the season.
Okay. Well, I'm happy that you didn't think that it was so terrible. Yeah, as I said, I'm really sorry that you faced that in your regional mood competition. Well, first and foremost, there's nothing big you can do, and I don't think a complaint would make a difference. The only thing you can do in the Vis Moot for the future generations, you can actually report it that that arbitrator won't arbitrate your team anymore if you have the feeling that he's being biased towards your university. But nevertheless, how to deal with it in the situation? I never had it really an unpleasant arbitrator. I had just one arbitrator who was extremely tough. I was in the rounds of 32 in Vienna, where we did have the feeling that if she would have it her way, she wouldn't let anyone of us through. But the best thing you can do is just keep composure and just kill them with kindness at the end of the day, because there's nothing really you can do, but you just don't let yourself get aggregated by such conduct, I guess. It's a very unsatisfying answer, I know, but it's the way how things are. They're the arbitrators, they're the one judging you, and you need to convince them. And in real life, at the end of the day, it's not you personally who is being attacked, and it's your interest of the clients which should prevail. Yes. Beaucoup dire.
بخاطر go ahead.
Your microphone is still on mute, Beaucoup dire, just so you know. I'm afraid I can't hear you, Bokudir. I would suggest, in the sense of, because we're not going to do a break now, because I love the questions you're doing here, and I still want to have the second presentation going on. Feel free to just write your question. I'm going to answer it before I continue with the next presentation. And for the others, I'm just going to take two more. It's going to be Madiyar and Aisha. And then afterwards, I would just take all the questions and I'll just keep my second presentation short. Does that sound like a plan?
Perfect.
Cool. Then just let me just quickly see in the chat if there is a technical problem here. Let me ask in the chat. Yes. Feel free. I'm gonna answer your question before I continue with the second presentation. Till then, Aisha, feel free.
Hello, Sebastian. First of all, really insightful lecture. Really enjoyed it. As a person who's quite an animated speaker myself, it was really consoling in a way to hear another animated speaker speak. So my question is that I've been told by my teammates that I answer questions a bit too thoroughly to the point that I'm messing up with my time management. That when I start answering a question, I try to make it as persuasive as possible, and then I end up using a bit too much time doing that. Do you have any suggestions for that? Because everyone just keeps telling me what the problem is, but no one is really helping me come to a solution. So that is something that is really bothering me at this point.
Yeah, Aisha, I feel you. I completely feel you. It also goes back to the saying, you know so much then about the topic that there's so much you want to actually talk about, and then you lose time for the other things. Keep it short, keep it simple, and what our team in Minds does, for example, is they write down all the questions they've gotten throughout all the pleadings, and then they try and write down an answer which is short and comprehensive, read it through, and then they have it in the back of their mind. They don't necessarily learn it by heart, but it just helps if they say, yes, Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, it is our submission that this is the case. Similar to the case, the so and so and so, it was decided that due to the fact of this, this is the case. Okay, those were 3 sentences, and it takes up, don't know, 25, 30 seconds, maybe less. And then if they want to ask more, then that's not your issue, and then you can go more into depth. But just if someone should decide how comprehensive you should answer the question, let the tribunal ask for more depth. But as I said, I do feel I feel you in this instance. Just real quick, because I am. Can you still see my presentation? Can you also see the meeting chat which on my display, or is it? Can you only see the presentation?
We can see the presentation.
Okay, perfect. Okay, now, yeah, makes sense. Okay, thank you, Aisha. Now, I had the question from Bokudia concerning the importance of the rebuttal. Inherently important. You can win and you can lose a pleading with a rebuttal or so rebuttal. It is so important. So you have 1 minute time. Never use exhaustively the complete minute. Keep it short. Keep it spicy. Keep it comprised, and try and make your point like a bullet. And then just say, okay, and that's the case. And if you make that short rebuttal, what effect it has is you're going to give the ball then to the other court. You're going to have opposing counsel then so rebut on that. And what's going to happen then is they will have shorter time to figure out a proper answer. And it's going to make it very difficult for them to then come up with a very intelligent, good answer. So it is super important, and it just plays a huge role, and it will make a significant difference in your scoring. But how should I manage my time doing the pleading and all proceedings? Okay, yeah, guys, listen, thanks for those questions. I'm going to go into depth to them in that with after my second pleading. I'm just going to take Madeira now on one more question, and then I'm going to continue onwards, and then we can have an open discussion. Great. Madeira.
Okay, thank you. So you've mentioned that the judges, they hear the case many times, and I thought probably they know the best arguments, the strongest ones by heart already, as they're being constantly repeated. So maybe you should try to entertain the judges and to come up with some new arguments that no one has mentioned yet, maybe even if they're not the strongest ones. What do you think?
A good idea. I made the experience that it won't necessarily work. Based on the fact that one, they have an arbitrator's brief, and they have a slight idea what's going to be said and what's not going to be said. And the second thing is, if they don't get that new argument from the get-go, they won't like it. And a new argument will always bring the aspect of being exciting, but they need time to be convinced. And in light of the the structure of the Vis Moot, they won't necessarily have the time to be convinced. And maybe, and that's also the other thing, and it just goes back to also understanding your tribunal. It can be that a German arbitrator will love your super idea, and then a common law lawyer would then say, well, no court has ever decided there's no precedence. I'm sorry, I just don't necessarily like it. So try it out. I mean, if you come up with a brilliant idea and it just works out for you, be my guest. Be careful and don't be surprised if you would face some issues. Mohammed, as I said, I'm going to go into that. I see a very nice long question, and I will go into that in depth to that in 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Okay, then I'll just quickly try and I'll just quickly swipe over here. And then we're going to go now to the second presentation here. Perfect. And play. Now, going into elements of effective pleading. Now, this presentation is basically going into depth how to have a good pleading, in my opinion, or my feedback and my tips on how to be very persuasive, or how my coach used to say to me, how to sell ice to Eskimos. Now, introduction to effective pleading. We're just going to go have a quick overview, go into the importance and then into the objectives, which make a great pleading. Now, the components are substance, style, and balance. The substance, we've said it before, I'll say it again. Do your research, or you as a team, do your research, talk, and understand every single corner of the things and the arguments you have worked out. Inherently important. If you know everything about an article, no one can shake you down and you will always have an answer. And that will bring the fact that you seem very professional and you seem very well read and very persuasive. The style is one of the most important aspects because it makes individuality come to rise. If you have a loud, if you have an aggressive style, try and tone it down a bit, but just let it show, because then people will see your style of being a pleader. Because I've heard so many times people who are so incredibly solid, but at the same time, you've heard that type of pleading style a million times. I'm sorry. I mean, it's the same thing if you go through Spotify. I mean, if a good art, I think you would all agree with me, a great artist is someone you just hear like a mile away and you know, oh, that's that song. I can hear a Justin Bieber song from a mile away. I know exactly how his songs sound like. I can hear a One Direction song a million miles away because I know exactly how that sounds like. A style just makes them remember you, and it goes into play in saying, okay, is that a great advocate or not? And balance, as I said before, of trying to find a right balance between going into a substance or maybe adding a bit of your style. Because for me, example, I try to be funny. I'm not always funny, but I do tend and try to be a bit funny and implement a couple of jokes. But at the same time, I do one has to understand that this is still a moot all hearing, and you do want to come across as a professional advocate. Now, the rhetorical aspects. Going back to Greece, ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, ethos, establishing credibility through professional demeanor and through preparation. Now, we had the question before, does complex language mean that you are more professional? No, it doesn't. It just doesn't. It just makes it a bit more complicated. And the funniest thing is, for example, doing our studies, I'm doing international private law as one of my main focus points for the bar exam in Germany. And I've read Professor Huber's book concerning international private law. And he's written it in a way that is so simple and so easy to understand. It is, in my opinion, one of the best books you could have bought in Germany concerning international private law. Why? Because he uses analogies with football. It is for someone like me, it's so easy to understand. He uses analogies of everyday life. He uses simple and clean languages and just basically says, okay, this is the term, and it means in comparison to everyday life or everyday situations, this. Simple as day and night. Pathos, appeal to emotions judiciously to enhance the persuasive power of your argument. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means, as also asked before, add your emotion in there. Try and show, let's say, for example, you have the situation that somebody asks a question, and you say, "Yes, Mr. Presiding Arbitrator, this is exactly the point why we are even having this hearing today. What is the clear line of the CISG?" And it is our submission that it's this. I'm saying, "Yes, Mr. Arbitrator, this is exactly what I'm trying to say." Or saying, "Mr. Arbitrator, respectfully, we are of the opinion that this was the case. These were the facts. This is the rule, and this is how it should be." Being very determined about that, we have to just acknowledge that this situation has to be decided like that. So adding emotions in different situations, not always, but very smartly in those moments where you want to make your point very clear, is inherently important. Logos, present logic, well-structured arguments supported by evidence and legal precedents. Logic. This is the word you have to always remember. Logic and simplicity. Have that, and you will go a long way. Now, embracing simple language. Clear, accessible, precision, and impact. Clear, I think I've said it many times before. Make it very simple, make it very easy to understand, and also how you actually present it. Make it slow, make it clear, and emphasize what has to be remembered in that sentence. Accessibility, avoid legal jargon, as I said before, to make your pleading accessible to all tribunal members. Because you also have to understand, they can all speak English, but their English standards may vary from nation to nation. It can very well be that also an arbitrator or a partner or a judge does not know that precise word which Professor Ingeborg Schwenzer used in her commentary. And then they might ask, what does it mean? And how would you explain it? Again, with a difficult language, or would you just try and do it like Professor Huber in his book, make it as simple as possible that everyone understands? Funny thing was, I made that was the first pleading in Vienna, and we had to discuss about what is an aircraft and what is not an aircraft. And then the presiding arbitrator asked me, so basically, Mr. Rheinwald, what you're saying is it walks like a duck, it looks like a duck, it flies like a duck, so it has to be a duck. And then I think that was a great way to try and show the problem. And then I just added on to this, say, well, Madam Presiding Arbitrator, whilst I do understand your analogy, we do have to modify it a bit to the sense that we're not looking for a duck, we're not looking for a goose. The only thing we're looking for is a bird. And in this case, the drone is a bird. And in this analogy, in the sense, it is also an aircraft. And that just shows that you're using the simple language, which someone who is vastly more more capable than me in law, and you're taking that aspect and you're just reiterating it into your pleading. Precision, make it very clear, make it crisp, make it precise. Know what you're saying, go into depth into that exact aspect, and make it have an impact. Make it memorable. Use sentences which mean something. Make sentences also in the intro where people like, damn, okay, he set a tone, he set a frame for this pleading, which I will definitely remember. Now, mastering question handling. I think this is a good way of kind of dealing with these anxious moments of a difficult question where you say, oh my God, I have never heard this question before. What is he talking about? Listen, pay close attention. If necessary, write down the question. Take a pause. Many people mistake a pause with incompetence, whilst it is like taking control of the scenery. As I said, you are the master of time in this instance. So what you have to do is basically just embrace the silence. Think about what you're about to say. And then afterwards, give a clear and precise answer. And that is very, very persuasive. Answer. As I said, direct answer and elaborate with an example, with a case, and keep it short and don't try and bust your pleading. Now, the strategic question provocation, I already mentioned it in the presentation before. It is a method which you can use, and it's a method which I think we implemented quite well in our year, and it can just ease up the pressure of having unwanted questions in areas which you would never expect. Because if you have a problem and you had your online question rounds and your pre-moots and your law firm pleadings, you know exactly where the problems are. So you might as well, if these questions are going to arise, you might as well provoke questions in those areas which you can handle pretty well. And you can do that with phrases. You can make provocative phrases which are maybe ambiguous, and the ambiguity will lead them to them saying, could you please clarify that this for us a bit more? And then you come with your case law. If they don't, then that's the way it is. And if you see that they are maybe a bit confused, then take the opportunity and try and add it on. And then just as if you are answering the question. But in general, if you know where the questions will fall, try and provoke questions which you would like to have with provocative sentences or with sentences which leave room for interpretation. Framing. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to highlight the weaknesses of your opponent. And if you want to go into depth of what the problem is with your opponent, you can start your sentence with opposing counsel has mentioned that this is the case. We are of the opinion that this is not applicable in our case because this. And then you're basically inviting the opposing counsel's stance into your pleading. Hence, you're giving room for the arbitrators for them to go into depth of what opposing counsel has asked. If you don't do that, in some cases, the tribunal will then say, well, opposing counsel said that, so what is your opinion of that? And that is a problem in the sense of that they are also saying, well, you know, you're not going really into what opposing counsel said, hence you're not necessarily that responsive. And that is a point which plays into the points of how you're being scored. And then follow up. Be prepared to go further into depth of the problem you highlighted and the solution you have. Case law and knowledge of the file are imperative. Now, engage with the arbitrators in the conversation. As I said, keep it and have it almost like an open dialogue. Not all arbitrators are going to have a discussion with you. That's just the way it is. But if they are, try and embrace it. Try and take it into consideration. Try and have it like a back and forth dialogue, and try and mark off the points you want to say throughout your pleading with that discussion. And if you do that, it just seems like a coherent, self-explanatory discussion for 14 minutes. And establish a professional and approachable demeanor as if into you are open and answering questions. And if you have any questions, you can bring them anytime. You do not want to rush those 40 minutes, because if you rush those 14 minutes, it seems unprofessional and it seems as if you're nervous. Take it slow, take your time, have partly the arbitrators take away the points you wanted to say for you and then answer them. And if you're done with the question handling, and let's say you have two issues you want to address, and then you quickly take a sip of water and you think to yourself, well, I have now done 4 out of 5 arguments which I wanted to do for the first issue. Then you look at the clock and then you see, okay, I still have 2 minutes time. Then you can approach the last issue. If you look at the clock and you're over 7 minutes, then you say, well, I made the majority of my point. I'm going to continue now. Because you will score high for a great question handling, and you will score high because you made your point built into those answers. And encourage insight. Frame your arguments to invite thoughtful questions and observations, which just goes back to provoking questions from arbitrators. And there are situations where in a tribunal of 3, there's one arbitrator who's just completely silent. And there's nothing necessarily you can do about it. Don't do what I did at the beginning and have to up and then ask the tribunal, do you have any more questions? Because you're done after 12 minutes. It was funny in that situation, but don't do it in Vienna. It would not go well. But you can include the silent arbitrators with non-verbal situations and verbal situations, such as eye contact. What you would like to do is establish eye contact successively with all 3 arbitrators. And if you notice that there's one arbitrator who doesn't ask any questions, then build a bit more eye contact with him. Show him that you see him. Show him that he is part of the conversation, and show him that you acknowledge him, because it can very well be, even though he doesn't ask any question, he thinks that he is left out. Inclusive language. Inclusive language in the sense of if that silent arbitrator is, for instance, a common law lawyer, that you can just bring common law arguments, and then you can also show your hand to the arbitrator and say, well, for instance, in common law members of the tribunal, this is the case. You can also show him, if you have read into the arbitrator and you see that he was writing on an award, you can say, now, as the fellow arbitrator here in the award in 2022 has rendered, even state himself that this is the case. Direct engagement. Go into depth of the questions of the arbitrator and try not to obviously avoid it. Now, if the silent arbitrator asks a question, then make the best out of it, because you probably won't ask a second or a third one. And balance the tension, address the whole panel. Mastering tone and tempo. I think I answered that question, this subject before, but trying to make the best out of your pleading and score high individually because of the way of your pleading style. You have to modulate your tone, your pace, and your strategic pauses. Now, strategic pauses, let's start with this. Strategic pauses are there for one, to give you a moment to settle down, to calm down, and just go into your next point. And more importantly, it is a provocative instrument of inviting questions. If there is silence, then people will tend to feel more comfortable in asking you a question. So it comes back to the point. If I know that there's a question concerning this topic and I made my opinion and I want to go into depth to that, what do? I say, this is the case, this is our opinion, pause. Not too long, not too short, mainly like counting to 3, 1, 2, 3, and then presiding arbitrators asking you a question. If not, it just comes professional because you're taking control of time and you're making that clear. Pace control. You want to make it, you want to almost speak unnaturally too slow. This is the general thing. If you are generally a fast speaker and you just feel more comfortable, do that. But this is just an advice. If you feel like the way you want to change your pleading style and you just feel like the pleading style you have is not convincing for yourself and for others, try and talk slower, because then people will understand more what you are saying. You will less, you will tend to say less. And you will, and that's more important, you will have the variety to emphasize something more clear. So let's say, for example, yeah, I think I can get it back. I think I still have my intro in the back of my head. So let's say, for example, you're saying, "Thank you, Mr. Presiding Arbitrator. Members of the tribunal, good afternoon. As already introduced by my co-counsel, my name is Sebastian Rheinwald, and I'll be addressing the substantive issues in this case. The intent to deceive is inherently important for this case," and so on and so forth. Now, you saw that the first sentence of my intro is one of the most important things, because I want to make clear that the intent is one of the most important things. At the same time, you heard, as already introduced by my co-counsel, I don't care about my co-counsel right now, but I'm just making a nice sentence, just going quickly, and then saying, I'm going into the substantive issues in this case. Again, a bit more important. So just modulate that with your pace and with your tone. Now, concerning the tone, yeah, I read into a couple of things, and it apparently a more deeper tone tends to be a bit more persuasive and more convincing. But I don't want you to start changing your natural tone in your voice. But I would just emphasize you that you just see that your tone is not on, and your voice is not stressed, and just talk in the most natural way as you can, in the slowest pace you feel comfortable. And that should be your natural tone. And if you want to emphasize something, you can go a bit higher, or you can get a bit lower and louder. Now, utilizing standard phrases, I'm having a short list, like "with respect, if I may, in light of," and it is submitted that. By the way, if there's any interest, you can always reach out to me, guys, via LinkedIn. And if you would like to have a small handout, I had one prepared, and then I can send it to you guys. Feel free. And just give me a second. I see that my laptop is running low on battery. Okay, and yeah, addressing the arbitrators appropriately. I think I went into that fairly a lot. And yeah, just practice with you guys. I mean, take scenario preparations. Some people, you can pretend to be a very tough arbitrator. You can pretend to be a very light arbitrator with no questions, which can be very unpleasant in some situations. Do role play sessions, feedback analysis, and refinement. And try to always improve yourself. Take the feedback into consideration and just go with the flow and just see what works and what doesn't. And that will vary. No, we don't need to go into that because I know that you guys have a lot of questions, and that is my last page. Now, listen, we have still officially 20 minutes. I have a lot of time afterwards, so we're going to now just answer as many questions as we can. Just give me a quick second. I just need to quickly check something here. Yeah, okay. It is plugged. All right. If I should get kicked out for some reason because I noticed that the hotel electricity is not that well, I'll just log into my iPad and then I'm back then in a second. Now, guys, shoot. Let's go with the questions from the chat first, because I think that would be the most fairest thing. Yeah. Now, we did yeah, okay, let's do should we mention opponent weak points? Yes, in the rebuttal, you should definitely address the opponent's weak points, and just one. Not two, not three, just one, and make it short, crisp, and precise, 100%. And always stay respectful. Mohammed Ajwad. While preparing arguments from the written memorandum, if a person feels that he has only added the arguments of utmost importance, and still then it exceeds the time limit of 14 minutes, then how to effectively summarize arguments? Wait, I have to understand this question. While preparing arguments from the written memorandum. Okay, yeah. If a person feels that he has only added the arguments of utmost importance, yes, still then it exceeds the time limit of 14 minutes, then how to effectively summarize the arguments? Well, what you can do, and it's a fairly professional and a nice way to do it. You can look at a watch and then you can give yourself a time limit, like let's say 12.5 minutes, and you notice that you have not been able to address the issues, all the issues you wanted, then you can always say, you can always ask for an extra minute. If they give you an extra minute, the arbitrators have to decide that. But what you can also do, and you notice that even if I have that extra minute, I can't utilize everything what I wanted to say. Then you can always say, members of the tribunal, as I can see that my time is coming to an end, I would like to shortly and briefly address just 2 more points concerning this issue and move on to the next point. Feel free to do that. Take control of the whole pleading. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to make your point, and they are here to listen to you. And that is a respectful way of making that clear. Now, do we have to say all sub-issues in the oral pleading if we have a limited amount of time, or just present the main issues? No, start off with the main issues. I mean, if you have a lot of online practice rounds, you see what the main issues are. And the sub-issues basically will then arise if the tribunal actually will ask for it. If they don't ask for it, just don't address it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be very clear what they want to hear and what the exact issues are. If I am asked a difficult question and I need time to formulate an answer to this question, how can I gain this time? For example, can I answer a question with a question and thus gain time? Would this be the right thing to do? No, I would not do that if I were you. I mean, as I said, I'm just talking from my position, and I would never ask a question back to to the tribunal, because the tribunal will then say, well, I'm the one asking questions here. There are situations where you will have where you need time to answer, and just take the time, take the pause, have something to drink. If necessary, pretend you are writing something to your opposing counsel, push the letter to him, and then he should pretend that he's trying to look for something in the case file, and then you will gain there some time, and then you can start formulating in a slow tone your question. But to be honest, there will come times where you don't know the answer. And if that's in the case of an online pleading or a pre-moot, then that's the case. Then you know where your weak spots are, and then you will just check. And then just go with the flow and just make sure you have enough online pre-moots, online pleadings and pre-moots, and that you know every single question that could potentially pop up. And trust me, if you have enough, that will be the case. All right. let's go now back to the online questions. I will go to Mohammed. I will address your question in a second. Let me go to Ferangis first.
Thank you. So one more question. I wanted to know your true opinion about it. So since we are students from Central Asia, would you think we are capable of going through arbitration community and like trying to build our future career? And is it essential to have a law degree in foreign universities? Because I've heard that so many parties, while they are facing some disputes in arbitration, they try to choose European or American lawyers and even arbitrators.
Can you rephrase your question
So what's your
in just one sentence? Are you asking me if there's a bias, or what do you think? What is your question?
No, what do you think? Is it like is it can students or even some lawyers from Central Asian can they be chosen by the parties when they have some disputes? Because I've heard that there is a bias about the language, that we're not so good at it, or our knowledge is not so good.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna answer your question in the most personal way I can.
I can help you then after you.
Yeah, sure. I understand where you're coming from, and I understand why some people might perceive it that way, and it is a very difficult question. And obviously, the Vis Moot is here to have all people and all students on different countries, no matter how the infrastructure or how the accessibility to different tools are together. And I can imagine that in some instances, a name or an appearance might invoke a certain bias. I mean, I'm not accusing anyone, but I can imagine that that threat is there. Nevertheless, I do believe that there should be a benefit of a doubt towards the arbitrators in that sense. And I do also believe that it doesn't matter from what country you come from. You will have it harder. To be honest, if you have Humboldt University or LMU University going against the University of I don't know where, then obviously just because of the name, the expectations will vary from university to university. Nevertheless, it is not impossible, and I've seen universities kick big name universities out, and right so too. Concerning the language, I think we have to differentiate that with the aspect of having a prejudice towards the university, because at the end of the day, there are sometimes instances where there is a language barrier which plays into the equation. I'm not accusing anyone. I just seen firsthand that if somebody talks with a dialect and you understand it, that should not play a problem. And as far as I've seen a scoring, where I was, for example, arbitrating, it was not a problem. If, however, you are having difficulties engaging with the advocate, that will be, in my opinion, a justified problem, because then it just takes the point out of, having an advocate and trying finding a solution. I hope I answered your question as much as possible. I get your point. I believe that the risk of having a bias is there. And that is also a main reason why I would like to also support as much as I can teams who do not have the resources as the University of Mainz, for example, has, by coaching, for example, the team of Dar es Salaam, or taking the time of talking to other teams who would like to have some feedback from people who have competed the prior years. Did I answer your question?
She said yes on the chat.
Okay, yeah.
And
You just
Sebastian,
want to say something to that?
Yeah, if I may jump in here. So I'm totally agree with everything that was said. And I just want to add that you don't have to worry from which country you are. For example, last year, like this season of Vis Moot showed that two teams of Central Asia, it was MNU, our university, and University of American University of Central Asia, which is located in Kyrgyzstan, made it to top 32 and top 16 when they competed with very strong universities and had quite good scores. That's why you don't have to worry about the country that you are representing. And as to the law firms, as you told earlier, most of the big clients try to find lawyers from Europe. I mean, that was the case like probably 15, 20 years ago, but at this stage we have quite good law firms in Central Asia. For example, I'm working in a tier one law firm, which is called Kinsteller, and we have multi-billion cases in arbitration, and we have Whiten case, we have Dentons, and we have many other tier one law firms in Central Asian market that have quite big arbitration cases. That's why I don't think that there should be any issues when it comes to the Central Asian countries to represent their issues in arbitrations.
Yeah, thank you, Zen. Before I'll take Elias, there was a question in the chat from Mohammed. If it is a little time left and an arbitrator asks a question, can we only ask them to ask this question for... No, don't do that. Nope, sorry, Mohammed. Don't ask ask this question at the end. Answer the question and then sum up your submission. Or if they you need an extra time, just ask for an extra time, but don't ask them, tell them when to ask the question. I am wondering if it is possible to get feedback from an arbitrator, because I think that direct feedback from an arbitrator will help you understand your weak points in your speech. Definitely. I mean, after the pleading, just say thank you and just ask them for you individually what that person thinks you should do better, because I think intimate setting is always way better to have personal feedback than in front of others, because it can end up of being maybe a bit of embarrassing, and it can also for some cultures make the person lose a bit of face, and they try and always be respectful in that instance. Now, Elias.
Yep, thank you. So I have a question about when you face with a situation where the arbitrator doesn't understand the main issue of the case, what can we do? What tips can you provide us?
Nothing. It is a very difficult situation. I mean, I mean, we're all students here. I mean, I would say, what the fuck is going on, man? I mean, honestly, he doesn't understand the issue, and then I would be very desperate. But it just goes back to try and guide. I mean, if you're lucky, he will say, I'm having issues understanding this, or we would ask you questions implying that he doesn't understand the situation. And what you then need to do is just take it slow. Take your grandmother through the park in that sense and try and guide him through. And try and keep it respectful. You don't want to call him out on him being ignorant or dumb or anything, but just go through it step by step in the most respectful manner as you can. I am so sorry, but has the attendance form been released yet? Yusen? No, right?
Yet.
Nope. No problem. Any other questions? I mean, we have here a significant amount. I mean, I'm surprised. 68 people. Awesome. I mean, and shortly it was even higher. So I'm very, very, very grateful of you, all you guys attending. And I'll be here for another 20 minutes. So if you have any questions, I'm going to leave this open and you can feel free. And otherwise, if anyone else wants to just leave, feel free. Thank you very much for taking time. And I hope that my advice helps, and you can always text me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to give my expertise or help you as an arbitrator in an online practice round. I can send you the cheat sheet which I created, and I'm just happy to network with you guys, and I definitely wish every single one of you all the best, and I do hope seeing you in Vienna if you're leaving this chat now, and if not, feel free to ask any questions. I'm down.
Sebastian, if I may ask a question, please. So,
sure.
Yep. So some of my students from MNU thinks that I am pressing too much on the Moody's and I am asking to do too much tasks. And while implementing those tasks, I always try to compare the German universities. I know that you guys don't study for whole semester, like most of the universities. And the only thing that you guys do is preparing for Vis Moot. Could you please shortly elaborate on that part? Like how much time do you used to spend when you were a Mootie, and how much your Mooties are spending these days for preparation to the oral hearings and writing memoranda?
So my coaches would say I didn't spend enough time, obviously, and it is still haunting me that I haven't been as attentive as some others, which I obviously disagree. But so in Germany, or specifically in Mainz, what we do is we have the privilege of actually investing a whole semester in into the Vis Moot, and we are being taken out of studies. Just by the way, thank you to everyone with those kind words. It was great having you guys. And we basically study, especially where in those phases where it comes into the submission, we arrive at between 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then we leave at like 6, 7, 8 in the evening, the office, and we're just sitting there writing on the memo and writing on the doing some research. And then what we also did was we wanted to get started with the pleading practices fairly early, so we started 2 or 3 weeks after the problem was out, and we just got to grips with like the standing pleading phases. So that would consist of us doing speech exercises. That would consist of us trying to interact and answer questions. Time management, we were like brutal with time management and stuff like that. And then when it comes then to the oral phase, we toned down a bit on the practice, because the practice itself was just us going from one online pleading to another and going to law firm pleadings. And which was quite exciting, because we were 6 completely different people, and they're basically in my family now, and we had 6 different pleading styles and approaches, which was something which I would always emphasize. If you should ever coach your university, try and bring a bit of diversity into the constellation of the councils, because if you have 2 people who are the same and people don't like it, I'll say, no, sorry, both weren't convincing enough. But yeah, that was basically us. And then it was in the oral phase, there was, I think, 2 months where we did not go without having one pleading. So we had one pleading every day at least. So wait just a moment, Mohammed. I apologize for any confusion. It was attendance sheet on previous sessions. Will it be in this session as well?
Already
Yeah, Yusen can answer that.
Yeah, I already sent it to the chat, so you can just fill it.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so that was us. I mean, Yusen, to be honest, and just going directly to you, obviously there will always be pressure, and pressure sort of makes a diamond. But I think German universities are a bit of a bad example, because I think we just have a bit more flexibility in that case. I mean, you guys have way more pressure than we do. And I just find it amazing that in April, you guys have the time and the nerves then to come and then perform brilliantly. And by the way, I've seen that basically no one left the chat, so this is really, really cool. Thanks, you guys. Yes, I'm so sorry. I do not even dare to mispronounce your name. I see a Qizi Tak. Bayram, maybe. No, Bayramova.
Gizeltaj, it's in English. I
Okay.
have a question, but it's not directly related to our lesson. I'm really passionate about arbitration law and moot courts, and actually, my passion stemmed from arbitration law, learning about it. But in my country, there is no institutional arbitration, and it's just new developed area, and like there's no foundation yet. But that's why my parents, for example, discourage me about my passion. And there are also in my society people like they compare arbitration with other institutions like court, prosecutor, and they say they belittle arbitration law. I try to prove that no, arbitration is a great institution. We can do this, but like in my society, there are some people who lacks legal consciousness. Like how I can cope with it.
How you can cope with it, having people not being understanding of arbitration, that's the question. Okay, I assume that that was the question. Well, first and foremost, I think it's great that you're so passionate about arbitration. And first and foremost, I think it's great that you want to attend the Vis Moot and just keep on that passion. And I think it's really admirable of you to even ask that question, because let's be honest here, okay? As I said, we're going for law school, and law school is psychologically very draining and very tough, and especially for you guys who have a lot of pressure in that sense. And now you doing something passionate and something which is a bit out of the box in comparison to what normal studies is, having that resistance is obviously very difficult. And how do you can cope with it? Surround yourself in a community like where we are right now. I mean, we are right now altogether over 50 people who are really eager to perform well, and just try and cope and try and interact with these people as much as possible. And when you do that and you start learning and studying more and more from these, learning more from these people, and you have your personal group in your country, well, then you can have an environment where that resistance just does not necessarily affect you anymore. May I ask from which country you are from? Bayramova? Azerbaijan. One of my favorite Formula One tracks in Baku. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, what can I say? I mean, surround yourself with people who are just fairly interested, and try and get your team and your teammates and your coaches also surrounded with these people. Reach out to them, make online sessions, reach out to people like Yuzen or Yanis, or people who bring a certain amount of expertise. And also just try and dare to reach out also to law firms, just to have like a quick session with partners or local arbitrators or people from Azerbaijan who moved then to, I don't know, the United Kingdom, stuff like that, to have like a brief talk and a brief lecture about the Vis Moot, the arbitration and stuff like that. Just try and make your environment as fitting and as positive as possible for you. Because I tell you one thing, once you are invested in a Vis Moot, as great as the experience is, it can be emotionally and physically super draining, especially if you are very invested in it. I hope that answers your question. Obviously, no worries, anytime. Any other questions? Yes, Vadia.
Yeah, this question isn't particularly about arbitration or Vis Moot, but I understand that you come from Germany, right?
Yes.
And I have a question, how like prestigious it is to have an internship in Max Planck Institute for Comparative and International Law. Have you heard about it?
Yes. what was it? So I heard from the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Law.
Yeah, how hard to get an internship there and how prestigious it is.
How prestigious it is. So I haven't applied for it, and I personally don't know anyone who has applied for it. But what I can tell you in general from higher institutions and higher courts and applying for these places, I think especially when it goes in the direction of comparative law, arbitration, or just commercial law on an international basis, especially when you do the Vis Moot, I think it is a big advantage because you just the certificate of participation shows you that you had basically a whole semester where you did nothing else but learning the fundamentals of international trade. You have a whole semester understanding what the countries were able to acknowledge and what they weren't able to acknowledge within the CISG. Hence, what the international sales standard is and what they would like to have in national law dealt with. So having this Vis Moot experience, I think it will be inherently more helpful for you to get in these kind of institutional organs. In general, in Germany, to get an internship in places, we are very it I had the privilege that I got to know the majority of the people personally through the Vis Moot, where I applied for an internship and that worked out. In some instances, they do look at the grades and at the marks. But in Germany, there's a huge movement concerning diversity and bringing people from different backgrounds into different organs. So it is far from impossible to get an internship there, especially if you bring more to the plate than an average student. And with an average student, I mean someone who did not compete in like a moot court. Any other questions? No problem. I mean, thank you guys for all the questions. I still see that we have 40 people here. I mean, you feel free just to ask anything. I mean, you can also ask about my experience in the Vis Moot. You can also ask what was great, what was bad, what I think is super important, what I think that was completely messed up, how the parties were. You can ask anything, seriously. I'll try and be as open and honest as I can without ruining my name.
Sebastian, for some reason, I received a question to my private chat. I don't know, maybe they're being a little bit of shy. The first one, what was the biggest mistake that you have made as a Muti that you would prevent if you get back to your time? And second, whether you can share the presentations to the students.
The second question was what?
Whether you can share presentations with the students.
Sure. They should reach out to me, and then I'll send the presentations and I'll send a cheat code. I can do that. And just so you know, if I'm quickly out, I'm going to come back in then via my iPad because for some reason my battery is just draining. So just don't leave just yet. I'll just get back in immediately. So the biggest mistake I've ever done. What was the big? Okay, so for some reason I am thinking about a lot of the time, and a lot of the times I think about the rounds of 8 because it was an intense pleading. That was the pleading where we got kicked out by the winners of the Vis Moot, and I did leave the pleading a bit disappointed in myself because it just did not go the way I really wanted to, and the reason for that was because there was the situation where I felt that the presiding arbitrator was asking quite erratic questions, questions which were so far from logic, and it just kind of took away the possibility to try and show my strengths in the pleading. Whereas at the same time, the opposing counsel had one of the best advocates there were, even though he kind of lied in the pleading, but that didn't matter because I even believed him. I believed every word he said. I'm not saying you should lie. You should never lie in a pleading, by the way. But yeah, if anything, I would want to change that and just grasp a bit more control of that pleading, because it was an amazing day, and going through the knockout rounds and being then in the Obergeschoss and then hearing you going through from round to round, that was like the best feeling ever. And that at the end of the day, I just felt like we could have proceeded, but. And the second question was, yeah, just reach out to me and I'll send you the presentations. The most difficult and personal things happened within the framework of the Vis Moot or other arbitrations. I think meeting my friends, because you have to understand, if you do it as intense as, for example, Yusen wants to do it, and as intense we have done it, you spend more time with the Mooties than with your family, and you get to know them in an intimate way as nothing else. And if you're open for it and you go through really tough times where you're just like, fuck it, I don't want to do this anymore, and what the hell am I doing, then you get to know every single side of that these people, and then a great friendship or even more can arise out of that. And I'm very grateful, because I'm still very close friends with all the Mooties from my EM. And trust me, we are so different. We can't be even more different, but we just are there for each other, and we play like twice a week tennis. No party, no job, no traveling, except for Journey of Mood. Yeah, right. Right. Farangis, please.
So I think it's the last question from my side. What do you think
Doesn't have to be.
about the
It doesn't have to be your last
Sorry,
question. That's all I'm saying.
am
It
I
doesn't have to be.
audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. So what do you think about the impact of AI in the future to the arbitration?
I think it's going to be very interesting. Obviously, AI is a living body which is just getting more and more intelligent, and especially in arbitration or international in commercial law, it brings a lot of threats, and it brings. Just give me a quick second, one moment, because my friend just entered the room. Du kannst gerne aufs Bett gehen, gell? Kein Problem. I'm sorry, my friend just came from partying, and he will just quickly go to the next room. So I think AI is going to be very, very influential. I don't know. I think also in a very negative way as well, as to the sense of when it comes to contract conclusion, for example, when to artificial intelligence conclude a contract. I think that will be very interesting. How, for example, who is liable in these instances, stuff like that. It's going to be super interesting. It's going to be super relevant. I also imagine that in the next couple of years, it's going to be also a mood problem. In what way, I'm not sure. It's going to be another challenge for the CISG, which you have to then interpret in the most weirdest way probably as possible. Also very interesting to see what Ingeborg Schwenzer's authors in her commentary are going to say about that. But it's going to be very relevant. So the best thing you can do is where you can cross-examine different references of scholars or cases, which just helps you to just search through the entire internet for that specific case to see, oh, okay, does this fit more into the Vis Moot problem than the other? And also which scholars and which authors were mentioned in these things. I do use it to summarize things. I do use it to make presentations. I use it also to make brief summaries of large PDFs for university. But get to grips to the AI restriction as to the Vis Moot problem this year. Any other questions? A really smooth session. Do I need to ask Yanis how the session went yesterday? What's going on? Well, I'm really happy that that all worked out. I'm just gonna ask one last time because there's still 30 people now here. From the other guys, do you have any other question? You can also write user directly. If you're too shy, that's fine. I'm happy to answer whatever you'd like.
Here we go. We have another question in the private chat. I don't know why they're sending me here. So what are the 3 must-read books in arbitration for you? Oops, it seems like his battery just died and he'll join us in a minute. Guys, if you have any other questions, don't be shy. You have an opportunity to ask him directly or just drop a message to the... Oh, cool. Just a second. There we go.
And 2. Perfect.
Yep. Have you heard my
Yeah.
question that I said or not?
No, I'm afraid I haven't.
So they are asking what are 3 must-read books in arbitration? What would be your suggestion?
So I would definitely recommend the Huber Mullis on the CISG. Gary Bourne, definitely. I mean, he's like a god level scholar when it comes to arbitration in itself. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a bit biased because he's my professor, but I think a very easy to read book is definitely Professor Huber books. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
And otherwise commentaries in itself, obviously you can basically read anyone. I mean, like when Ferrari, Kröll, Huber, Ingeborg Schwenzer, the old books from Professor Schlechtriem. Yeah, I mean, all those books are very insightful and helpful. And then obviously also from different arbitration institutions to digest. And there's one thing which you also have to know. So this year's arbitration rules are going to be the Finnish arbitration rules. And what you have to also understand is when you get a case, it might happen that you're not going to find any case law concerning those arbitration rules. But you cannot forget, many arbitration rules are fairly similar. So also look at the ICC, PCA, at the UNCITRAL rules. I mean, in different arbitration rules, and you will find maybe presidential cases, and then you have to establish if there is if the articles in those arbitration rules are comparable or not.
Well, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for the answer. Well, we have Farangis here. So.
Thank you. It was not the last question. So one more question. As we know, most of the universities, especially our university in Tashkent, are when we're writing our memorandums, were divided into procedural and merits part. Like 2 people write the procedural issues and 2 the merits. So what do you think, if I'm a procedural part, should I go deep into the merits part?
you should at least understand what the merits part is going on. In some instances, there are some facts and some issues which might be relevant for both procedural and merits. And it can also be that some arbitrators would like to see that you are capable of, if you also know what's going on the other end of your co-counsel. Plus, on top of that, if you should also understand the problem in the sense that you need to know the case file, and if you understand the problem and if you understand what that person needs, then you can basically open the page and think with your co-counsel. So I wouldn't go into depth as much as the merits do, but I would definitely read into it.
Thank you. And one more question. So,
Yeah.
when you were when you were a student and you participated in Vis Moot and you met some people or some arbitrators, have you tried to keep in touch with them?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, my job at Baker McKenzie came from the fact of the Vis Moot, and it was like the best time I had, for instance. And last year when I visited Vienna, I've seen many arbitrators who remembered me, and I remembered them. And in Orgazel, we had a drink together, and it was really, really cool. And via LinkedIn, you know, they see your development, and obviously they reach out and like to also give you the opportunity to maybe see their law firm or give you advice. And it's also always nice to hear from them. Any other questions? No problem, Farangus.
I see no more raised hands and no questions on the chat, and that means that we can just conclude the session. Sebastian, it was a very informative and nice session. I'm like, not only me, but I'm sure that all of the students participated today enjoyed the session. It was very informative and interactive. Most of the students got the very valuable knowledge, skills, and life hacks that hopefully they will be using during their selection process, during their oral rounds in Vienna or Hong Kong. And I hope they will have a chance to see you in Vienna and or anywhere else. And once again, thank you for joining us and for your willingness to help us in this journey. It was very informative, and we really appreciate this. Thank you.
No worries. And you guys all the best, and take care, and hope to see you soon. And as I said, reach out if you need anything else. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. All right. I hope you guys fill the attendance form, and we can just slightly conclude the session if there is no questions. All right, I see no raised hands, so Timirlan. All right, go ahead.
Yes, Sebastian, what about our task of